they still have to struggle a little bit, right? Because if you don't have to struggle a little bit, then understanding that everybody doesn't learn the same way you do isn't always so easy. I swear to God, when I was in grad school at Carnegie Mellon, it was super imposing, right? I constantly had imposter syndrome. Have you heard about imposter syndrome? Where you look at yourself and you're like, I don't belong here. How did they let me in? When are they going to kick me out, right? So I'm giving talks on computer science education, which are fraught with psychology research, to a room that has like Turing Award winners. And Turing Awards are the Nobel Prize of computer science. There's like 3 of them sitting in the back of the room. And I swear to God, one of them raises his hand and goes, but can't you just teach them Fibonacci numbers? That got me so excited that I could print out the Fibonacci numbers on my computer that I just did computer science for my entire life. And I really wanted like one of those snarky black t-shirts with like the white lettering on it that said, I'm sorry, you're not part of my target research population. You're a Turing Award winner. You, by definition, are an outlier. They gave you lots of money and celebrated you on stage for being an outlier. Your self-reflection on your learning process isn't necessarily important. And so sometimes it's not, right? No, I'm serious. Like, to the guy who wins a Nobel Prize for computer science, basically, your learning process is not going to be indicative of an inner city kid in New York City and how they come to computer science, right? Because odds are, if they were on the path to be you, they learned half of what I was trying to teach them already just by knowing that there was a website out there that teach them. Right? So thinking through all of those different pieces is a really important thing of what we're doing here in New York. And I wanted to kind of take you on a journey a little bit from this computer science should be in schools all the way back to the 80s when it first started to now, through a little bit of what we're doing here in New York, and then we'll go back to the really interactive kind of part of it. So to give you a little background, Seymour Papert, who was an MIT professor, decided that computers were exciting and that kids liked exciting things, and so kids liked computers. And more than that, the computers were a machine to think with. They were a physical representation of problem solving and thought making. And so way back in the 70s and 80s, he brought computers, or what passed for computers then, into schools, and robots for students to play with in order to try and problem solve. And worked with kids here in Harlem, actually, as low as kindergarten and first grade. And made huge proclamations about the wonderfulness of this work. So why a robot? Why a robot? This is for the people preparing to be teachers. Why a robot? And a psychology person.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm a teacher.
That's okay.
I think because it's an invention, it's out of the box, and it causes students to think beyond the limits that they probably set for themselves, which I think is a really important thing for teachers to be able to do.
Okay. Anybody else?
I feel like it's something they just like have seen or played with in like pop culture with like movies or.
In the 70s, not so much.
Okay.
Not so much.
But still like the interaction part of it.
So the cool and exciting thing, right? That's the story the media always tells us. Computers are cool, they're exciting. Love kids play lots of video games. They should be good at computers. Robots are important for a very different reason, and it's really important to younger kids. When a kindergarten, first grade, second grader is learning to think, right? Where do they do most of their thinking? With their hands, right? They do thinking outside of their bodies. They stand up, they move around. I have a 2-year-old, and watching her learn to stack blocks and all of those things over the last 2 years have been like the cognitive psychologist in the back of my mind just goes crazy. She's going to be like Leonard on The Big Bang Theory, where like mom studied her. I just move right by it. The robot takes that thought process and makes it external. It takes the things that they were thinking, the problem they were solving, and gives it a physical representation that they can then apply for what's super important for feedback, right? It is very easy to say to a kindergartner, why did the robot hit the wall? Oh, because it went left instead of right. And that thought process is the beginning of what we need to understand for computer science. Why did my text not display? Why did it not access the right record from the database? Because it turned left instead of right, for some abstraction of left and right. And so getting them to think through that is really important. And Seymour, who is the father of not constructivist, which you might have heard about education, but constructionist. Students need to construct things to make knowledge. They need to build artifacts to build knowledge in their brains. Constructivist is students need to just play and construct knowledge from real experiences. But Seymour believed they needed to make things. There's a lot of writing about that. There's a whole movement about that here in New York City, and to varying things. But so he argued that computer science makes you better at everything. It makes you better at math, it makes you better at English, it makes you better at history, because it teaches you rigorous thinking. And so he authored this book, Mindstorms, which is a great read. Talks a lot about kids. He was really thoughtful. However, it actually turned out to be a lot of hook'em. And not a lot of people say that, but it kind of was, because in education, transfer is the golden goose. The idea that I am going to teach you how to do something here, and you're going to be better at something over there because of this thing, is like me saying, because I taught you to do jumping jacks, you're going to be able to count better. There may be a spurious relationship, and I may be able to produce that outcome if I count with you while you do jumping jacks. Right? And some small increase of blood flow to the brain, blah, 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 may improve. Plus something called the Hawthorne effect that says if you study something, of course it's going to change. Because you, by being there as an observer, are going to make a change in the system. And so when pretty much every study anybody ever did to try and show that learning computer programming made you better at math failed, guess what happened to computer science in schools? Not so much anymore. So when I was in elementary school, I actually learned BASIC. Because like a teacher thought it was cool to show us in the corner one day. We pen, print, go to whatever. And it doesn't exist anymore. It got stripped away because it didn't actually improve anything about the math or science or English scores that students had. Yeah?
Is that the same how the directors will tell you that by taking band, like starting 4th and 5th grade, you'll do better at other subjects?
Yes, absolutely. And what you should say in the back of your brain whenever you hear that is transfer is the golden goose. So there's a great paper, and I know you guys have a reading list. This is not required reading, but Clark and Carver did a series of studies on young children's learning how to debug Logo. So they wrote little programs. They were given programs that had mistakes in them. They had to try and fix the mistakes. And they actually found transfer to fixing mistakes in essays. What Sharon, who was one of my PhD advisors, I love her dearly, and David Clark was the leader of the program I was in at CMU, what they found was it wasn't that learning to debug made you better at learning to debug your writing. It was that if you taught someone a structured process for how to look for errors in a document, that they would use that structured process to how to look for errors in another document, even if the writing was different. And so there are ways that you can get transfer from one program to another, from math, from computer science to math, from computer science to English language learning. But it has to do with the structure of what you teach and not the magic of learning to code. And so that's an important thing to think about. And one of the things we really think about here in New York City. So, like computer science stopped happening in schools. And of course, because computer science stopped happening in schools, people decide to stop majoring in it in college. Because if somebody tells you as a high school senior that you have to pick one flavor of ice cream to eat for the rest of your life, are you ever going to pick pistachio if you've never tried it? You might love pistachio. That's the best ice cream on the face of the planet. But you've never tried it. and it's the only ice cream you can eat for the rest of your life, you're not gonna pick it. So when computer science left the schools, it also left the majors as a whole. In addition, gender and everything else doubled that whammy. And we come to today. What's different today in terms of the onus of what we're doing now? We're still not making the argument that computer science makes you better at everything. Some people in the media are, but the people who are really doing this work are not. What makes it different? What's the biggest difference in 2015 and 1970? Yeah.
Well, right now, there's a market and a demand for computer scientists and programmers.
Yeah. Yeah. Right now, for every computer scientist who graduates from college, there are 2 open jobs. It's why the starting salary for an undergraduate degree in computer science is one of the highest paid undergraduate degrees right now in the nation. Supply and demand. We don't have enough people to fill the jobs that we have open. My favorite statistic is in the middle of the crash, like in 2008 when the housing market crashed and unemployment was super high and everything. If we had filled every open job that was looking for someone with computer science skills, we would have been at 4% unemployment as a nation. The week before the market crash, nobody remembers this, but Bill Gates went to testify to Congress and basically threatened that if they didn't give him more visas to bring in foreign workers because he couldn't hire enough Americans, he was going to move Microsoft across the border into Canada because he couldn't hire enough people to fill the 5,000 openings that he had. Like, people forget that. And so that's what's different then and now. Computer science doesn't have to make you better at everything else because we have lots of jobs in computer science. You just have to be good at that one thing. It's nice if it makes you better at other stuff, but it doesn't have to be the reason we teach it anymore. And so in 2012, actually started late 2010, 2011, a group of folks in New York City came together and said, we don't have enough people in New York City doing computing. And New York City, actually, right behind Silicon Valley, is the 2nd largest employer of tech workers. 1 in every 5 people in New York City works in a tech job right now. Believe it or not, the banks, like all the big finance companies, they're all really tech companies. Most of their employees are technology employees. I think Morgan Stanley has more tech employees than Google does. Is that all about the technology? So a venture capitalist, Fred Wilson, got together with some folks at the Department of Education and the mayor and a little bit of political clout, and decided he wanted to open a school for computer science. And lots of arguments early on about whether or not the school would be selective, so one of the screen schools like Stuyvesant or Bronx Science, or whether it would be open enrollment to anyone. The Department of Education was very firm, and they said we are not going to open any more selective high schools. I don't know if you guys know this or not, New York City is the most segregated school district in the nation. Even though we have such a huge diverse population, the schools themselves are very segregated because of the screening process. And so the Academy for Software Engineering was open as a non-selective school. We had 300 students listed on their school selection form, and through somewhat of a magic lottery / matching process that the DOE does, we were placed with 130 ninth graders. 42% of them read on grade level, and 64% of them did math on grade level. So that's pretty indicative of New York City school population. Something that people don't realize, the city is stronger in math than they are in literacy as a student population. Everybody assumes that everybody's also bad at math. Our kids actually have hard time reading, and they do doing things like that. And so the school is 94% minority. Our plurality is African American. Right behind that is Hispanic. And then we have a very small Asian population and an even smaller white population at the school. It was so funny, one of the teachers said to me this year, it's in its 4th year, this freshman class are now seniors. He said, we have our first white girl. Our first non-ethnic white girl is in this year's freshman class. after the school has been around for 3 years. That gives you a little bit of idea of how diverse the student body is. So the school opened, and we said, yes, we can teach computer science to every student and they will be successful at it. It is not rocket science. And we did. And because of that success, the venture capitalists in the city doubled down. And so here's a little bit of what we teach. And so this goes back kind of to that skills. We are a career and technical education school, so we have to document all of this stuff and write it up, which I love, and send it up to the state. So this framework is actually built on some research that was done by a group at the University of Washington. And the name of the paper is What Makes a Great Software Engineer. It's a short paper, I think it's like 5 or 6 pages if you're interested. Only one of these things actually has programming in it. And it's only one of a series of topics in that strand. We spend a lot of time with the students on professional behavior. As you can imagine, for many of them, school has not been an exercise in success. It's been an exercise in failure for most of them. So we actually work on their self-efficacy as a part of the instructional practice. Persistence is really important. How do you, when the computer tells you it's wrong, unlike every other class where you take a failing grade and you throw it in the trash can, how do you go back to it? And then back to it again? And then ask your neighbor for help? And then ask your teacher for help? Right? That persistent behavior is something we actually work on really hard. How do you seek help in professional environments? If we give you a structure for help seeking, it no longer feels like you're doing it because you're wrong. You're just doing what you're supposed to do because that's what the teacher said. It's the structure. Project management and general engineering practice. So we follow a modified agile development cycle with the students, making them iterate on the projects that they do, right? How many people iterate on things in school, in high school? Your English teachers, right? You have to write an essay and they give it back to you and sometimes they'd make you rewrite it. How many other times have people asked you to do things more than once? How many times were you able to give your peers feedback and then do it more than once? So for just about every project we do, the students look at each other's projects and on a sheet of paper they leave warm feedback and feature requests. We call our cool feedback feature requests. To stay in the software engineering thing. We talk about problem solving and we structure it in a meaningful way for them. So the interpretation and translation of problem statements. New York City kids are literacy weak. How do you read a paragraph of text that's telling you what to do and turn it into directions that your brain will process, right? And then once you know what it's asking you to do, then how do you break it down into tasks, plan the solution, and then how do you think about what you made? Does it work? Does it work for the people you made it for? Not just yourself. And then finally, that role of computers in society. So we've hit most of the skills that you guys said were important to have. Not so much the literacy, but we do a little bit of literacy too. And so because AFSI was such a success, in fact, we're the highest performing new school in New York City right now, based on attendance, Regents rates, our anticipated graduation rate when this class graduates, we open new programs. So the Bronx Academy for Software Engineering is the second school in the Bronx. It's a really quick bus ride, subway and bus ride from here, if you guys ever want to come visit. And our software engineering pilot, 9 high schools, 9 middle schools around the city, putting computer science programs in existing schools as opposed to starting whole new ones. BASE is a really cool place. The principal believes a lot in design thinking, and so the students do 4 design challenges a year. Building things with technology, but also in their other classes as well. And so after those 3 things happened, the venture capitalist, Fred Wilson, decided that he didn't want to just give money to the DOE and then have them manage it. He wanted more control and wanted to fund more programs because we were doing great things. And so CSNYC was born. I kind of call myself CSNYC employee -1. Because the same guy who donated the startup money to CSNYC donated the money for the school so they could hire me as a consultant and pay for me to help them build the high school. So what we do, we make grants So we give grants to programs that we believe in. Most of the time, those programs need to come to us with some kind of research results. Generally, we pick up where the National Science Foundation, the NSF, leaves off. So one of the programs that we fund is Bootstrap. They have a small NSF grant. They were in, I don't know, something like 50 or 100 schools around the nation. We brought them here, threw them in another 100 in New York City, and now we're helping them get even more. We do evaluation and research. Yes, yeah.
I just wanted to clarify what is Bootstrap.
I'll talk about our programs in just a second.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I was just giving an example, but that's a great question. We do evaluation and research, so we give these programs money. Are they spending it like they said they were going to? Do they actually put computer science in schools for some definition of computer science? And my favorite part is the research, right? Are the kids learning? What are they learning? How does it help? How does it not help? What are the teachers learning? Because obviously we're training teachers. How does that all fit together in meaningful ways? We're building capacity for K-12 CS education. We're training a lot of teachers. And then we support 2 communities in the city, a pedagogy meetup and educators and volunteers meetup. If you Google CSNYC meetup, you will see you are welcome to join our meetup group. We're having a big landscape meetup on October the 21st. We feed you and give you I don't think we're going to have drinks at the landscape one because we have about 250 people coming, but normally the other ones there's drinks and food and people talking about all kinds of interesting things. So if you're interested in CS education, I would recommend you think about even just joining the community, because then you get Cindy's emails that tell you about everything interesting going on in the city. So the programs we support, the 2 academies for software engineering. I'm going to give you these slides that you can share, so please don't feel like you have to write furiously all of these URLs. Bootstrap is really interesting. This is the only program I've ever seen transfer directly to math. So the students do, they build a video game as a part of the 6-week unit, and they engage with a problem-solving process. So they're learning a process where they're taking word problems and decomposing them in something called a design recipe. And the really cool thing is the way that Emmanuel Shanzer, who's the guy who runs Bootstrap, measures this is he gives them word problems from math tests, from like the state, like for New York State regions or from the Massachusetts state math exams. And the kids who do Bootstrap do better on the math exam questions. Our special ed kids, when we did this program at the Academy for Software Engineering, had an 800% increase over the control group in their ability to do math word problems. Super exciting. Code.org, these are the guys who do Hour of Code. You might have seen all of their commercials and their media push. They also do bigger programs where they partner here in New York. ScriptEd is more of that career-ready workforce training. So kids do JavaScript and front-end web design with volunteers from industry, and then go and do 100% of the kids who earn their certificate go and do an internship. They've been around for a few years now. They're now seeing their graduates who are full-time employees in companies come back and teach the next generation of kids. It's really exciting. The software engineering pilot, this is our middle school, high school program putting computer science into existing schools. TEALS is a really interesting professional development model. So TEALS kind of marries that computer scientists have one expertise and teachers have another, right? And the idea is we really want to like put their brains together. So what TEALS does is it finds volunteers from the computer science world who come into school's first period and co-teach with a classroom teacher for 2 years. And over those 2 years, the idea is that the classroom teacher learns the computer science from the professional, and the professional gets less and less needed. And while they're there, the teacher can help manage the classroom and classroom management, all of the things that an educator needs to do. And after the 2 years, the idea is that you've kind of melded their brain a little bit, and the teacher will likely go off and do more professional development after that. But it's a really great way to kickstart that program that is very different from a lot of models which are like, we're going to give a teacher a week in the summer. And then Beauty and Joy of Computing is a program from Berkeley. A new computer science advanced placement course called CS Principles is coming out. It's very breadth-based. And they're trying to translate the Berkeley CS 101 course to New York City Public Schools, which is really interesting. And we have a very large $5 million NSF grant to do that work. So, all right. The really exciting thing is CS for All. CS for All is the announcement the mayor made last month. And you guys are happily ensconced in school, and I'm not sure you were aware of it. Does anyone know what CS for All is? Oh, yeah. He heard.
Is that the mayor's like 10-year plan to have every student in New York City?
Yeah. Yeah, computer science for every kid in New York City. CSNYC is the private partner of this public-private partnership. The mayor threw $40 million into the bucket. We're raising another 40. We have 11 million committed already. It's 2 months old now. It's always easier to get this in the beginning. And so, in terms of the warm-up that I had you do first, these are all of the problems that we are working on right now. Communicating all of this to schools in this mandated environment where every school is going to have to offer computer science. And so all of these questions are really important. So, I just want to collect all of your answers that you've gotten before, and then, when the job is done, but not really. And the curriculum too. So this is like where my brain is every day right now, is in these questions and thinking about them really carefully, because nobody has good answers. And so what the $80 million will pay for over 10 years is funding for teacher professional development, right? We have to train those teachers to be computer science teachers for some level of that. A blueprint for CS education, so what are the skills that we should be doing in schools? District level support staff, external evaluation, private researchers who have nothing to do with us other than the fact that we give them money to evaluate it, and then a school-based mandate for computer science. And what that means is every elementary school needs to give every child at least one experience in computer science. We'll define what the parameters of that experience are. Every middle school has to offer a CS course that is an elective that students can take, and every high school has to offer a CS course that is an elective that students can take. So that is the school-based mandate. And it's a school-based mandate and not a student-based one. So we will never hold a student back for having not completed an activity. Yeah?
I have a question of whether this program would be standardized or whether it would be self-determined.
Yeah, that's a really great question.
I feel like, I grew up here, and I did go to a specialized school, so I can see how there would be inequity if it was self-determined for lower income schools versus standardized curriculum.
Right. Yeah, it's a great question. So we're thinking about this not like we are a single school district, because New York City is the largest school district in the world. 1,700 schools, 1.1 million kids. My favorite stat is 1 of every 300 people alive in the United States today, 1 of every 300 people, adults, kids, babies, is enrolled in public school in New York City. That's the size and scale of this project. And you also know, having grown up in New York, right, that if the mayor is like, you're going to do this thing, there would be revolt in the street, right? There would be pitchforks and torches, and yeah, we'd all be like running around town. So this is where that blueprint comes in. The blueprint is almost like standards. It's what defines, what qualifies as that. And then from our perspective, we hope to offer principals a portfolio of choices so that they can pick from things that aren't necessarily standard at every school, but have been curated for excellence. Question?
For the funding for teacher professional development, I'm really curious about that just because, like I said, I'm being math certified, and I know applied math courses aren't going towards my certification.
Right.
So I feel like in this new CS for all, would it be, having a teacher who can teach calculus, but it can also do CS, if there'd be a lot of equity in that. So I wonder if do you expect seeing shifts in the requirements for teacher certification, along with even Common Core, that shift in more advanced stuff.
Yep, absolutely, yes. This is I am a huge policy wonk. I do as a teacher in the classroom, I do education research, I'm a huge policy wonk. And this report that I wrote, called Running on Empty, which is yeah, you guys made me skip some slides, was a 50-state analysis of their standards for computer science and technology mapped against the national recommendation from the CSTA. And then I looked at basically how all the states compared. This is New York, by the way, what you're seeing. So the little black is the national average. We should be at 100% everywhere if everybody was doing rigorous computer science everywhere. And admittedly, this was done back in 2010. It's been 5 years. I think it's even worse now in terms of the standards. And I love this policy stuff on the brain. I'm actually working with a couple of advocacy groups. We have proposals into the state to modify certification requirements. There are technology standards for teachers who are being certified to teach elementary, middle school, high school. You have to do so much in your pre-service program. We want to update them so that they're modern. We don't want to throw another course at everybody, but we definitely want to update it. And just like if you're becoming a math teacher, you can take an extension certificate to be an ELL, right? Or to do special ed. We're looking at ways to certify people to have an extension certificate on a math or a science license to also teach computer science, that we require that rigorous coursework. And then in elementary school, an elementary school person is really that liberal arts. I've got a little bit of everything because I have to teach math and English and history and science, right? We just want to add computer science to that list, right? And so changing their one technology course from a Word and Excel course at the college level, which is kind of ridiculous, into something more like the high school CS principles, breadth-based with a little bit of programming and algorithmic thinking, is a really great idea. So we're working on the policies around that too. Yeah.
I have a question on how you're going to regulate the excellence of these programs. Is it going to be standardized testing, or is it more of evaluation? I feel like there's a big difference between standardized testing of computer science
Yep.
and evaluation, whatever that means.
Right. So that is pretty much coming out of this blueprint. So right now, this is the funny thing, the mayor makes this big announcement, $80 million, computer science for all in 10 years. People think we've got it all figured out. No, they just gave us the money to actually pay ourselves to go sit in a room and do this stuff. So we're kind of just getting started. The budget was step one. And so Friday was our first blueprint, actually, last week. And so we're working on creating age-appropriate outcomes. And I've always viewed standards, standards right now have a really negative connotation, right? Standards, and there's testing, and they're teaching to the test. I've always seen standards as a communication vehicle. They are a way for someone who has knowledge that a principal, a teacher, doesn't necessarily have. It's the person who can see the big picture of what's going on. And a lot of standards are written by engaging industry and folks from around. It's a way to communicate what's important. If I've been in a classroom for 15 years, I'm hopefully good at my job, but that also doesn't involve me knowing the landscape of everything that's changing out in the professional community for that subject or discipline. And so standards are a way for them to communicate to me what's modern, what my kids need to know and how to do it, right? And if you look at them merely as their alignment to testing, then yeah, they're, from the devil, but if you look at them as that communication vehicle, and that's what we're hoping to do here, it's a communication vehicle to the schools. We know that we're going to hit the end of the early adopters, and we're going to get to those teachers and the principals who are right, whatever thing, how they can pass the test. And there will be mechanisms to make sure that the school does this right. I can't tell you that we're going to put into place standardized tests for computer science. Actually, hope we don't. Or if we do, they become these wonderful, amazing project-based learning things, like the designation is every school needs to have a computer science themed science fair, right? Something like that that really gets into that movement around creation. Part of the way to do that is identifying programs, right? Our teachers, we love them dearly, don't have a lot of computer science knowledge. We are not expecting them to invent the wheel. Instead, what we want to do is bring in programs that have communities of teachers already teaching one thing and bring other teachers into those folds by doing professional development opportunities. And one of the things that CSNYC does that's separate from CS for All is we test those programs. We give funding to programs that are fledgling, that have promising results and want to grow. And then a lot of this is going to be teacher training. We're training 5,000 teachers over the next 10 years as a part of that money. And planning on replacing the attrited teachers. So half of all New York City public school teachers leave within 5 years. They either move up to an administration job or they leave the schools. And so we're going to train 5,000 teachers. 2,500 of them are going to leave. We're going to have to train another 2,500 of them. And then half of those are going to leave and then we're going to have to train another one. So it's a little bit of a never-ending battle. But we're also partnering with schools of education, pre-service schools, to update their teacher training. I have 3 programs right now that I'm working with. Yeah?
You answered my question.
Okay. And I think that that's right. You need both the quick ramp up, which is what the in-service teacher training does, and you also need the pre-service training to fill in those holes as they emerge. So that's where we are. That's kind of what we're doing. And I had another thought exercise, but I think what I'm going to do is just kind of go to the end questions because I'm running out of time here. I wanted to show you 3 pictures. This is AC McCallan. She's one of those 120 freshmen that got placed with us, 130 freshmen. This is her going into the White House for the White House Science Fair. She and her team built an app for the Rise and App Challenge called Just Smile. I made them throw out their first idea, which was silly, and 10 other people had thought of it. And then I told them to talk to each other and think about someone in their life that had a problem. And they found that they all had a family member or a neighbor who suffered from depression. And what you may not know is that if you live in a low-income neighborhood and you have a family member who suffers from depression, it's not that they go to therapy and you drive them to therapy and that's how you support them. The therapist actually brings in family and friends and trains them in therapeutic methods because the odds of a low-income person being regular about their visits is very low. They may not have the money to continually pay. They may move around a lot, and the best method to treat that patient is to actually train the people who are around them. And so AC's team, because many of them had that training, built an app that actually does that with folks. So strategies you can do for mood alteration built into an app, as well as a way to quickly reach out. And this is why diversity in tech is so important, is because if without someone like AC and her group thinking about that problem and of having that training because they live in the neighborhoods that they live, nobody would have ever thought about that. Most of the depression apps that are out there are like, do you feel sad? It's like diagnosis, and then the last line is like, well, go see a therapist. And that's not always an option for people, so it's really great. These are kids from the Bronx school. That school is about 80% Hispanic. It's a very different student population. And this is one of our other students, Amir. We took a team down to DC to a professional hackathon for the Partnership for a Healthier America. And Amir joined 2 designers and a coder on the team. And together they won that hackathon. They got to meet the First Lady, and what they built was a website called Start a Garden that helps teachers make classroom garden to promote healthier eating. So those are some of the things I'm the most proud of. Thank you. What didn't I answer? What do you still want to know? Yeah.
When you mentioned that you were putting teachers on a 5-year track of either being administrative or leading, and then training another 5,000 teachers from
We don't put them on that track. That's what the data says that happens in New York City.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, 50% of New York City teachers from the first year New York City within 5 years will no longer be in the classroom. And the reasons they're not in the classroom are because they move up or they move out of the
Okay.
district.
And you said that you were training more teachers.
Yeah.
So right now, I guess from my knowledge, I I guess one of the biggest purveyors of schools, like kind of teachers into like underprivileged schools is Teach for America or like something like that. So how will you,
I actually did a workshop at Teach for America 2 weeks ago.
that's really cool.
Yeah, we are engaging with everyone. We are an equal opportunity trainer.
Okay, that's great because I know that right now in New York City there's like more teachers than positions open. So I was just wondering like the technical aspects of like how you'll get that to schools.
Yeah, wherever we can. And I think this is something really exciting. A lot of people had said to me, oh, why are you thinking about this extension certificate for math and science teachers, right? Why would they want to do computer science? They signed up to be a math teacher. They should want to be a math teacher. Well, two things. First, math teachers in New York State, most of them actually take 2 computer science classes already as a part of their graduation requirements from their undergrad program. It's a requirement. And 2, if you are a math, there are more teachers than jobs, right?
Yeah.
So if you are a math teacher, you want to compete to get into one of the better schools. Yes? What do you do now to make yourself stand out? You do your ELL, or you do your special ed certification. How many people who went in to say, I want to teach math, said, I want to be the special ed teacher in the back of an Algebra 1 classroom. Or, I want to be the English language learning teacher in the back of an Algebra 1 classroom. Right? They taught math because they love math. They want to teach creative problem solving and thinking and puzzles and everything. So guess what the computer science extension does for them? It gives them a third option for ways to distinguish themselves from their peers and get into that creative problem solving. Yeah.
Speaking of special education, what are like some of the plans for special ed and computer science?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this is an area where the domain is really weak, right? Up until now, it's like you hack it or you drop out. And there's been this mythology that computer science is rocket science because lots of people drop out. And personally, I believe that it's because we relied on students to be autodidacts, to teach themselves. Our teaching methods were so bad that you basically learn it yourself, right? And our computer scientist major sitting in the back corner, what do you think? Do you learn more from your professors or on your own when you're fighting with your programs?
I think a lot more on our own.
Yeah, so if you can't hack it on your own, thank you for trying, right? And so there's a lot of work we have to do in that space. But I think there was a lot of work back in the 80s, especially in terms of using physical representations. We're doing a lot of work at the Academy for Software Engineering. We're 20% special ed population. We do things like everybody talks about differentiated instruction. I personally am not a believer in it. I think, especially when you have a subject where everybody's supposedly starting at 0, you have to give similar instruction to every student. And the minute you start to give different instruction to different students, it opens the door for inequities, right? It just gives you a reason to say, no, they can't handle that. Every kid should get every instruction. But we do differentiated assessment. So you take your assessment to the point at which you can do that. And in project-based learning, it's actually really easy to do. We make our assessments very open-ended on the top. It's very easy to pass. It's kind of hard to get a B. It's almost impossible to get a 100. And so as they work through the assignments, they take it to their own level of learning. We get almost none of the behavioral problems you see in a lot of classes where kids go online and they look at other things and, oh no, teacher, I don't want to do this. Because a lot of that is basically they don't believe they can do it. And so we give them a starting point that everyone can get to, and that helps a lot with our special needs population. And then from there, there's a lot of one-on-one, there's a lot of peer support, there's a lot of things that are just good instructional practice that lead to that. But we do think really carefully about it, and we don't have a good answer to that.
Yeah, along with that, is there a way to kind of study it outside of, I know like when I had like computer class in elementary school, we could only do it within the actual class because afterwards people didn't have computers necessarily at the time, or even if they did, you don't necessarily have the programs, which sometimes you have to pay for. So
everything's in the cloud. How many people have seen Scratch? Oh, a couple. Yay. So this is used by a lot of our programs, elementary, middle, and high school. It looks really like a little kid, but it's great. And this is also a great way to deal with, especially some of our L's. Let's see if it'll load in this window. So this is what's called a visual programming language because you don't actually write code, you drag code. And you make a series of commands by putting the blocks together. They look like puzzle pieces. And we tend to start here and we'll move to typed or written languages. And the idea is, again, you have this physical object, this cat, that you're moving around the screen very much similar to Seymour Papper's robots. And using it to build on those concepts and those knowledge, you can get at most of the fundamental concepts of computer science with Scratch. It's a Turing-complete language. You can build any program in existence with Scratch. So we do lots of fun play things, and I think that it gets to the fact that it lives in the cloud, that if you have any access to a computer, not all of our students do, that you can do that in our labs or open it for school. Yeah.
I was wondering if there's like one class that a student taking computer science is more important than say the class like the new principles class, or like a class like the existing AP class where it's just basically learn how to do Java. Like I don't know if like, do you think that's better for students to learn kind of like theory in computer science, or to get right to like writing in a language?
So I think that's a hard question, right? So when you say students, are you talking about what? Are you talking about a humanities student, an education student, a STEM student?
And I guess I was talking about how, like, basically de Blasio's plan, he has every high school student taking a year-long class.
Yep.
And so I guess
Those classes are going to be much more like principles than they're going to be like learn to code. And there's a chunk of coding in principles. It's about 50% of the curriculum. There's just a bunch of other stuff in there. I don't think learning to write a for loop is going to teach you the implications that technology has had on our economy and our international relationships, right? You need to understand that as a good citizen of the world. Our current history textbooks talk almost nothing about computer science. And yet we won World War II because a computer scientist broke German codes, right? Alan Turing was a computer scientist at heart. Hence the Turing Award is named after him. There has been so much that has happened in the last 50 years that have been a result of technological innovations. The reason we are an economic superpower is our technology industry. It is the only thing that we export more than we import. And yet that never appears in our textbooks, right? And so that has to happen. We have to understand that. One of the things that our teachers at the Academy for Software Engineers teaching is how to read a book that has text and images or worked examples. He found that his 11th grade advanced placement class could not take a paragraph of text after this was their third year of computer science in this school, could not read the paragraph of text and connect what sentence went to which line of code. And so he's teaching them deep reading strategies for nonfiction, non-story-based texts. Because when in school do you ever encounter nonfiction, non-story-based texts? Right? There's a lot of things that come into here that computer science and technology education can be the vehicle for, that can really do a lot in terms of the way we encounter society as a whole population, right? If you are reading fluent, yeah, you'll pick that up, you'll figure it out for yourself, right? You'll struggle your way through it, and you'll go home and you'll ask your parents who'll help point it out for you. But if you don't have fluent parents, if you don't have literate parents, if your peers aren't literate, it becomes very hard to do that for yourself. And so we're also, the thing I love about CS for All is we're finding out all of these other subtle nuances in the ways in which our teach the test has failed a lot of our kids. We're starting to identify them and come up with real, exciting, project-based, meaningful ways to get to them. So.
In the teacher training program, are you limiting it to only, so I have two questions. First, are you limiting it to only science and math teachers?
Nope. We have art teachers and history teachers.
You can also get, yeah,
anything.
sometimes you just study English, but you are totally capable of
Yeah.
doing
Oh, absolutely.
it. And also, oh, what is that the pre-training program look like? How long does it take?
It depends on
Free
the
service.
program. Every program is different. Code.org, which I pulled up, does their elementary school training in a day. So they're K-5 courses, which are really cool. If you want to ever play with something nifty, come and play with like some of their computer science courses. They did a really good job thinking about the difference between student levels. So ages 4 to 6, it's for pre-readers, so there's no text in it at all. It's all icons. Ages 6 plus, you start to get a little bit of reading skills, and then ages 8 plus. And they're basically online puzzles you can play with. So each of these is a 20-hour course, right? And honestly, if I can't take an adult through a 20-hour kindergarten course in a day, then there's something wrong. And the course might be too hard for the kindergartner to do in 20 hours. But they offer a pile of trainings.
So
I'm
then
not
once
sure.
you're finished with that, you have a certificate, what?
You don't have anything at this point.
Yeah.
You don't have anything. You have a handshake and a piece of paper from Code.org that says you've received training, and your principal expects you to go to your classroom and do it. One of the things that we actually insist upon is on-the-ground support for our teachers. So our first 9 hires are going to be borough-based support staff. So 8-person four-man hand whose job it is to answer the call of teachers who are like, I'm trying to teach this thing, help me, I'm stuck. So 1 in Manhattan, 1 in the Bronx, 1 in Staten Island, 2 in Brooklyn, and 2 in Queens, because those districts are so geographically large. It takes several hours to get across on public transit. But we believe in people on the ground. You know, content coaching. It's really important. Question?
So I'm all for this, but I was just curious, how do you decide that students participating in other electives and not electives?
Yeah, it's a big problem, right? People talk about the economies of schools, and when they do, they're often talking about money. And money is not the biggest player in a school economy, it's time.
Because if you don't have like any slots for electives,
Right, exactly.
and then like into times when your kids is coming out here, but like I want to choose.
Yeah.
What is for
Right.
years and
But at this point, without anything, right, it's not really a choice. So all we're trying to do, and this is why the high school is not a mandate that every student take it. Although we are kind of working on that. So about 8 years ago, there used to be a half credit technology requirement for graduation, graduate from year school. Most of the time, it was like a keyboarding or Microsoft Office course, which is why they got rid of it. And they then took those technology standards, which do exist, and subsumed them into the other classes, right? The English class became responsible for also teaching you how to use Microsoft Word. Your history class became responsible for also teaching you how to use PowerPoint. We're trying to resurface that half credit technology requirement and bring it back to be a requirement. Because it's a half a year, right? Band and art are generally half-year courses. You need something that sits against health and gym. Yeah. Yep. Yep. I think one of my favorite examples of something that I would love to take to LaGuardia kids, have you ever seen there's a dance troupe, and they are, the outfits that they wear are actually all lit up with LEDs, and someone programs them so as they move, the lights also move, and so it becomes a dance both with the people and the clothing that they're wearing. And it's so beautiful, and it's such a great example of where arts and technology can meld in a meaningful way. And something like that would absolutely satisfy the type of work that could fit under CS for All and fit the needs of a school, which is why we're not doing like a mandated thing in every place. Yeah.
So, these are all plans for New York,
Yeah.
but what about plans for like
Grove Chicago, and it's not required at all, but they do offer that.
Yep.
And like, people have no idea what's going on outside of our little suburbs compared to CS.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're hoping that the stuff we're doing can be a model, and we're actually seeing other people come and ask us what we're doing and how they can replicate it in other places. I've been advocating for CS education since 2000. I've done the national fight, and we collaborate a lot with Code.org is an international organization. They're doing CS for All in Italy and Australia and a pile of other countries, Argentina, of all places. And I've worked with other states on the ground too. Chicago Public Schools is now doing, every student has to take a computing course for graduation called Exploring Computer Science. We're seeing it percolate, and we're seeing it bubble up. What I'm really excited about in New York is that because we're so large, and because we're treating this not as a one-size-fits-all project, we really can start to find out what the best methods are to hit our special needs students, right? How do we not just drop something in on everybody and go, okay, you're all gonna learn Java now, right? Without knowing anything at all about where they teach it or how students can do it. So we're trying to do some of that hard work. I'm writing lots of research papers. We're studying lots of things. I'm trying to share best practices with the world. All right, I think we are almost done. We'll do one more.
Isn't that the AP computer science course we got?
That would be like at the top, because if you think about AP, what does AP mean? What does that mean? College, right? By definition, it is post-high school. We're happy if schools implement it, but it's not what we should think about implementing for every child, because by definition, it's not every child. You have to be at grade level for that to work. Actually, you have to be above grade level.
So the three schools that do have it, should their curriculum be like changed as well? Or-
Oh no, they get to check that box. Yeah, they get to check the CS for All box if they have AP Computer Science. And we're thinking that the new AP Computer Science principles is going to check a lot of boxes, because the thing that people ignored from de Blasio's speech, which was really interesting, is that he said every school will now offer 5 APs. Guess what? The Computer Science principles, it's almost the only AP out there that doesn't require multi-year run-up. Yeah.
I have a follow-up question about that. So if AP Computer Science checks the box,
Yeah.
that's not really reaching all students
No,
in
because
school.
the high school can be an elective.
Right. But
And hopefully all of the rest of the kids in that school would have gotten it in elementary school, potentially in middle school as well. And, you know, for any school that just checks the box and walks away from it, then that's you know, not our hope and dream, but also we know that this is not going to be a perfect project. And hopefully those kids, if they're really interested, will sign up, and they'll have had enough background to do well. And if not, we're doing out-of-school and after-school programs. The Museum of Natural History is doing an amazing middle school project where they're taking kids into the parks and collecting data, and then going back and then teaching them Python and how to build visualizations from that data. It's really cool. Come to our meetups. Join our listserv. Find out about all of these really interesting things that are going on in the city. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, we can have lights on.
just, I'm feeling old.
It's hard to.
No, I get it.
Did everyone sign in? If you haven't signed in, you'll pass this around.
So, is there anyone here who's not actually enrolled in this? Okay, great. So we're going to go forward with welcome to STEM Colloquium course. So typically what we do after a presentation, after the Q&A, is we gather together and we have an additional discussion with just the course members. Sometimes we have some members from the public here, so we let them go and then we have sort of a debrief conversation. Tonight, what I want to do is pass out the syllabus and go through that. So so that I can answer any questions you might have about the syllabus, go over the dates of the course, that sort of thing. And then we'll have a brief discussion. I think we had quite a long Q&A, so I think we hit probably a lot of what was on your minds, but then we will continue the conversation a little bit tonight. Got extra? Okay, so, I'll let you read the introduction on your own. And I would imagine if you've been registered for a while, you might have seen this in Courseworks. But basically, let's start with the student learning outcomes. So in this course, we have the advantage of having different people come in each semester, so we never quite know exactly what the topics are going to be. But we want to explore and reflect on current topics in STEM education broadly. So this semester, in my intro tonight, I kind of gave you a heads up about what our topics are going to be.
Thank you. Thank you guys. You were a great class. So as you can see, we have a broad number of topics this semester. Hopefully we'll develop a little bit deeper of an understanding of what it means to be mathematically and scientifically literate. And I think tonight gave us some things to think about in terms of what it means to be literate in terms of technology. To understand that STEM education takes place within socio-political context is something important to this class, so we'll be talking about that. Actually, that's where I will probably take our discussion tonight. And then we'd like to have you explore your own roles in STEM education, or STEM more broadly. Regardless of whether or not you are part of the Barnard Education Program or part of the US Scholars Program, thinking about what you're doing in relation to STEM and possibly STEM education. So, in terms of assignments and grades, this class does have a higher percentage put towards class participation than is standard for Barnard, but that is because we only meet 4 times, and being here matters. We don't grade on attendance, but being here and being present and being part of the conversation matters a lot because we only really have the 4 interactions. And then on top of that, we do have reflection and discussion posts, and I'll talk about that in a minute, and 1 final paper. And let me tell you, that final paper is not a big deal. It's a 1 credit class. I'm not trying to kill anybody here. So, in terms of participation, you come to every class, you talk, you ask a question, you participate in the discussion, you're good to go. In terms of the reflection and discussion posts, in Courseworks, we have the discussion board set up, and for each topic, for each colloquium, I will create a, what's it called, a topic or a forum? A forum. And you need to, I guess, start a new topic with your initial reactions to the talk. So sometime between now and Friday, I want you to take time to just sort of write what you're thinking about what you heard tonight. Might be also about what you heard in our discussion afterwards. Then over the weekend, after everyone's had an opportunity to post their initial reactions, you need to go in and respond to 2 people's posts. You can respond to someone's initial post, you can respond to someone's response to your post, or you can respond to someone's response to someone else's post. But ultimately, you should be writing or posting 3 times. One is your own initial reaction, and then 2 other
responses. That's due on Monday. Then at the end of the semester, we do ask you to write what I would call a pseudo-research paper. Meaning that it is in some ways a reflection paper on one of the topics that was discussed this semester, but it should include some research from the field. So for each talk, I will try to get from the presenters some articles that they think relate to their topic, and if something comes up in our discussion, I will also try to put my hands on those articles, and we will post those to coursework, so you'll have some bit of literature available to you in the files and resources section of courseworks. But for this final paper, I am asking you to go and potentially find a few more sources, so that you're not just talking about what you think, but you are talking about what you think in relation to the literature in the field. And that paper is 6 to 8 pages, double-spaced. I do ask that you use APA formatting for citations. Don't go crazy in terms of like the cover page and all of that, but just in terms of citations. And please use 12-point font. My eyes are getting old. In terms of readings for the course, readings are posted in courseworks. Sometimes they will be posted in advance. So tonight I asked you to read a few articles, newspaper articles actually, about computer science for all. And sometimes I will post things after the talk as well, so that the resources are there for you. You are welcome to bring in readings to both your discussion in class and your discussions on posts, if you choose to do that on the discussion board. In addition to that, you will be asked at certain points in time to take a look at the Common Core standards for mathematics specifically, but sometimes also for ELA, because that's where we find the standards for science and technology. You may also be asked to look at the standards for mathematics from the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, and you also may be asked to look at the standards from the National Science Education Standards. I do not know at this point in time if I'm going to ask you to look at the next generation standards for science, but we might. But just be aware of those standards that are out there, because those are what are driving instruction currently in K-12 classrooms in New York State. This class will take a particular focus on STEM education in New York, just because that's where we are located, and we're thinking about the context for learning. That said, you are welcome to think more broadly. You do not need to focus on New York, and there will be times where we will talk about how things happen in New York in relation to other places as well. Okay, I think before I move on, are there questions about the syllabus?
In terms of the discussion posts, are they meant to be more like casual in the way we write them, or should they be like kind of more formal, short, responsive?
So I would prefer that you use standard English, no text speak. So not that casual, but they do not need to be written as essays or papers. In terms of length, I think I gave you a word count, or the initial one at least. So that should guide you there. But what I'm hoping will happen, at least in some cases, is that discussions will get started and carried out through the discussion posts.
Also, in terms of the final paper, you said some a reflection paper. So, is it more of like your view on that topic, or should we take more of like a research paper?
So this is where I call it sort of a pseudo-research paper. It's sort of a hybrid between research an in-depth research paper on something and a straight-up reflection paper. So you're being asked to think about a topic, but you are also asked to look at not just your own opinion, but what other people are saying about that topic. So it's something in between. Other questions about syllabus? Okay, so tonight we're in here. Our next class is going to be in the LOE room, and then, which is in Milbank Hall. And then we will be back in here for November, and then back to LOE for December. So we are being bounced around, and that's as of now. The registrar has the right to bump us at any time, and we've actually been bumped around a lot before I announced where we were going. So I'm assuming that we're good for rooms now. The classes have gotten going and everything's settled, but that is subject to change. So I will try to post just a reminder every class session, the day of class, where we're going. I apologize for sending you to the wrong place today if you went there. But right now the plan is for us to bounce back and forth between the two locations. Any other questions about the syllabus? So my preference for discussion would be that we get to all face each other. Yes, Ishra?
Can I share mine?
Yes. You want to do it?
So in the announcement that Professor Edstrom sent out earlier, there's a take the survey link. It wasn't written before, I just fixed it. So it should work now. So hopefully like 5 minutes you can. It's a couple of questions. Just about the survey.
It's really short. Okay. So I would like us to find a way to make a circle so that we can all see each other. We're a relatively large group, so we might break off into smaller discussion groups, but I think for our first go-around, I would like us to all see each other and all introduce ourselves. So
maybe if this
think
middle
the
row
people in
comes
this-
back one row and they turn around,
Yeah,
we can
and
kind
you
of.
all are gonna have to.
Can I put this on?
Oh, yeah.
There's just one that oh,
Actually, you guys can stay and you two come forward. For your turn for Angie, I'm gonna ask you to slide over one way or the other so you're not blocking this. I don't know if you all know Professor Rivera.
Hello.
She was in here when we started. We're going to go around and introduce ourselves so that we know who everyone is. And why don't we start with Rivera?
So my name is Professor Rivera. I'm the chair of the education program here at Barnard. And I guess my background is in science education. I'm the PI for the NSF grant that is funding the STEM Colloquium and bringing these speakers to class, to campus. And it's, one of my goals for the STEM Colloquium is just to build a greater awareness of STEM, K-12 STEM educational issues here on campus. So I'm really excited to see how large this class is. It's getting bigger every semester. That's just a sign that more people are A, interested, and B, finding out about it. So we're excited.
Hi, my name is Brandon. I'm a senior at College of Columbia. I'm a computer science major and I'm from San Antonio, Texas.
Hi, I'm Angie. I go to Georgia, and so this is my only class here. And I took it last semester, and I really enjoyed it. So I wanted to begin and also do some of the one classes that I took. The main and I want to get my doctorate
Grace. I'm a sophomore at Barnard, engineering studies major, and I am from Chicago.
Hi, I'm Ishrat. I'm a senior at Barnard. I'm majoring in psychology and math, and I'm in the tuition program. I'm also a Mode Scholar, so I'll be taking a ninth semester next year after I graduate to student teach and certify. I'm from New York. Oh, also I'll be doing like research for the colloquium, so I'll be like trying to just take down stuff that we talk about in discussion, just so we can have it like cataloged for what goes on.
So, I'm Professor Edstrom, and I've been with the education program for about 8 years now. I primarily work with the elementary student teachers and teach the methods and practical classes for the elementary level. But I also work with a lot of math students, and we'll be working with this class, and I've also taught math class.
I'm Mazabine, I'm Mazabine. I'm a first year at C's. My intended major is applied physics, but I'm not sure. I'm interested in combining STEM and education and public policy, so that's why I chose this course, and I'm a student.
I'm Dina. I'm studying psychology and economics. I'm in my senior year, and I thought I've always been interested in STEM education and how it relates to psychology, so I thought it would be interesting to see other perspectives too.
Hi, I'm Aiden. I'm a sophomore at Barnard, and I'm from New York. And in terms of my major, I'm still undecided, but I think right now I'm kind of leaning towards environmental science.
She's my class.
My name's Ashna. I'm a first year Barnard. I'm from Chicago, and I'm leaning toward being a CS major.
I'm Christina. I'm a senior at Barnard. I'm studying sociology and psychology. I'm from New Jersey as well as
Cindy. I'm also a senior at Barnard, studying urban studies, and I'm concentrating in environmental science, and I'm also doing the next program in Chicago. And yeah, I'm from
Hi, my name is Mel. I'm a first year at Barnard. I'm not sure what I want to study yet, but I'm really interested in the theories and practices of education. I'm from Pittsburgh.
I'm Zoe. I'm from Westchester, New York, one of the Professor Rose and Aziz. Hi, I'm first year at Barnard. I'm interested in studying biology with maybe a minor in computer science. I'm not really sure I want to do the science yet, so I thought I'd explore like education. I kind of like dabbled in like research and like education, so I'm trying to figure out what I like best.
I'm Amy. I'm a first year at Barnard. I'm studying architecture, and I live here.
And she's like a little adopted
Oh my
advisor,
God, yeah.
remember?
Well, my advisor wasn't here for like when I was supposed to meet her, so I just walked in with a friend, and that's how I met her.
I'm Hannah. I'm a senior at Barnard, majoring in psychology. And Dr. Tracy.
I'm Luna. I'm majoring in psychology and ed studies program. I'm Luna.
So, just popcorn this. In other words, don't wait for me to call on you. Just initial reactions. What's going through your mind after tonight's talk? What are you thinking about? Computer science for all, computer science in New York, all the things you talked about, computer science training for teachers. What's going on? What's percolating? As soon as someone stops talking, feel free to start.
I'm thinking we gotta offer a computer science in the city class, just like science in the city and math in the city. I'm like, we gotta do it, so I just talked to her about it out in the hall, and we're gonna talk about it. So I'm really excited. I think it'd be a lot of fun for our students.
It makes me really curious, like the question I asked her about how this is gonna like change with like teacher certification, because like there are such really weird strict rules about what like works and doesn't work for certifications. I really wonder like when we'll see that shift in teacher certification, and like will it first be that like extension programs you talked about, or will it just go back to when you're first trying to become teaching certified? Will it go from there? Is it going to become something that you need to have that like extension?
I'm also interested, sorry, in the certification because I took an APCS class in high school and my teacher didn't really know anything, which made it kind of a lot of like either you can do it, you teach yourself, or you can't really do the class. And so I think that the certification aspect and kind of really having teachers that are just teachers that actually are really computer science people is really important because it is a really hard thing to understand and obviously hard to teach. And so it's just how we're going to get more people who are computer science people into teaching when, as one of the articles mentioned, it's not just lucrative than being an engineer or working at a company. So.
I definitely agree with that. In high school, I was really turned off by computer science because my computer science teacher was exactly like that. He was a math teacher who was brilliant, but really couldn't teach. And really there was this attitude of like either you fit into some kind of mold or you don't. And I think that like in high school and even a little bit now, I kind of strayed away from CS just because I was kind of taught that mentality of you can do it. I think that'll be interesting to see how and like who gets to like teach this and like how to be able to teach this and how to like in this stage.
I'm kind of interested about the retention rates because in my high school we had intro to CS and then we had AP computer science and like intro to CS it was pretty like equal among like diversity and like gender equity, but then APCS I would say there were not like 4 girls in the entire like class. It was just like where did the drop come from and why.
And like going off retention, I wonder where retention comes with like teachers. And she talked about like there being like workshops for TFA teachers, but like TFA teachers aren't going to be there the whole time. So what about teachers who are like going to do this forever and want to be there forever? But then I guess it also goes back to her saying like that 5-year rate. So I was really curious as to like it's great to also talk to people who are doing TFA, but what about people who are gonna? It sounds really crappy, but like people are gonna stick around.
Is the 5-year rate something that exists like outside of New York in all school districts, like teaching, like on like a big picture level? It's it's probably, I imagine it's worse in math just because of the nature of like people who are seen as good at math, but I think it's a universal problem for teachers that like it seems like a career that is like really like choosing to do is not necessarily given the respect that it deserves as like the force that's shaping our future as a country. And so I think that's like really problematic for math, but also just for all teaching and fact that people don't want to work with it.
You know, I think the retention issue, from my experience, having been a classroom teacher for many years, I have 16 years classroom teaching experience, and then 10 years higher ed experience. It's good. So in my experience, the retention issue is about work conditions. In other words, teachers stay in schools where there's community, where there's support, where there's resources. The reason we have such a high turnover in places in the city, it has to do with working conditions. These are schools that have the leadership is us versus them. You're not working, it's not a collective, you're not working with the administrator to make change. You don't have the resources that you need. And so it's really problematic for me as a teacher educator. What I struggle with is right now teacher education is getting slammed, right? Because we're not producing high quality teachers. Like that's the rhetoric that's out there. It's not that we're not producing high quality teachers. It's that we churn them out and you chew them up. You put them in schools and the schools chew them up. Okay, and so it's not a teacher ed problem, it's an induction problem. What are we doing to support new teachers when they get into school so that they can develop a sense of efficacy and feel like they're being successful? I know what it was to teach for 2 years and not once have a principal tell me, you're good at this. You should keep doing this. And it wasn't until someone did tell me that, and I was ready to leave. I was ready to leave teaching. And I would have left, but someone told me, someone came to me at a professional development grant in our school, and someone said, you know, and this was a lesson that me, personally, I was kind of like, you know, not my greatest lesson. You know, you know when you're in the flow and you've done something really great and it went well. It wasn't my greatest lesson, but she pointed out all these concrete things that I was doing that made me, you know, good at what I was doing. And I stayed. And here I am. You know, I would not be here if it were not for, you know, that person. And, you know, so I think that we have to think about that induction piece and think about, you know, how we create conditions so that new teachers can be successful and want to stay.
I mean, I certainly think that's also related to like socioeconomics and like, I mean, a reason why there is such like a fast turnover in my turnover rate is because a lot of these teachers that enter, like they've been trained and taught all these methods, but they're placed into poor neighborhoods and poor schools and like the students' education is not their focus, that kind of thing. And I feel like if like there's more support in that kind of, well, I don't know how to do that, but if there's more support like economically and I feel like there would be a feasible kind of like change like going there. Because a lot of it's like funding.
Some of it, I mean, that too goes back to induction though. If you think about how we place new teachers. So my very first teaching job ever, I was a long-term substitute teacher. I went into a school in Brooklyn. I didn't really plan on having this job. It wasn't a job that I was looking for. It was something that someone actually knew I was capable of doing and asked me to do. And I got to this school and I was introduced to the principal by the superintendent. And the principal said, oh great, we need this person here. We're overcrowded. We need to expand our class. And the principal walked me around to all the first grade teachers, all their classrooms, and said to each teacher in front of me, give her 5 kids you don't want. On Monday, I had a class made up of 5 kids from 4 other classes that nobody wanted. So that school was no longer in danger of being taken over by the state for overcrowding in the first grade. Brand new teacher. No sufficient training. And I'm the one who gets the class with everybody's problem kids. Turned out to be one of the best experiences of my life because I realized that I actually like working with kids and I didn't mind that these were the kids that other people decided they didn't like. But that's the kind of situation that for many teachers, for many people, would make them go running and say, I don't want to do this. For me, it made me go running to grad school and say, I need to learn more about teaching because I need to be a better teacher. But most people do not go in like that. So we have to think about what we're doing with new teachers. But at the same time, I think there is a flip side to the teacher retention problem in that another phenomenon that's been going on in this country for the last 10 years pretty solidly has been that in the cities where supposedly the retention rate is so much worse, and it is worse because of the way we are underfunded in a lot of areas, and it isn't the best environment to teach. The solution has been to bring in people from programs like TFA where there's only a 2-year commitment. Some teachers come from TFA and they love it and they stay. But that's not the plan. They're not, a lot of them use it and it's being sold as, here's a way to boost your resume for when you go on to medical school or law school or whatever else you're going to do. So the plan was never for them to stay. So if we are looking for teacher retention, we need to really start thinking about what kind of teacher training we want that really is encouraging the use it as a stepping stone and want to use probably the nation's poorest kids as their vehicle for
And you're not gonna solve retention by putting someone who's only gonna be there for a short period of time. You're not gonna solve the retention problem.
And I feel like along with TFA and like other firms of that, it gives off, it like perpetuates the idea that teachers aren't, like, it's not an esteemed profession. It's something that you can be trained for during the summer and then do for 2 years, like it says career, as like a resume booster. And it kind of like undermines the profession in itself. Because it's like, this is just something I'm gonna pop on my resume, just like I joined the club to pop on my resume. Like, it's not a club, it's a profession. And I remember for contemporary issues of education, we read an article about like why Finland teachers are so happy. And it's because like they're like revered and esteemed, and like they were like told about TFA, and they're like, excuse me, you're gonna tell me that like someone's gonna do my job and they're not getting training that I've done for years? And I think like that's just something that programs like that, and like we just see it in our culture that just perpetuates that again. I think that's why we also see like teacher retention not being super high, because it's not something you want to be like, oh, a lot of people like it's put upon you that you don't want to do that forever, do you? And like the whole like you can't teach, like, sorry.
I think another problem, like in cities especially, is like finding teachers who come from the areas that most need good teachers, and like those good teachers are going to come from, or I guess like the best teachers for those areas are people that understand how to teach to those areas and understand like what schools are like there, and especially for like a subject like computer science, where the field now is mostly like a single demographic. I think like a big problem is not just training teachers, but training teachers that are going to understand where their students are coming from, not just how to teach the subject.
But you can gain that knowledge.
Yeah, and on that note, she did say that New York is the second largest tech center in the country. So we can find people in New York to teach computer science who are familiar with New York. They may not be familiar with what's going on in public schools, but that is the country. And Barnard Education focuses on public schooling in New York City to prepare people to teach here. Understanding that not everyone's going to stay a teacher, but a lot of people do. But also understanding that a lot of the Barnard and Columbia students who enroll in the program are not necessarily from the person. They just gain the experience.
Going off the idea that teachers should know like the student range they're teaching to, I never thought about it. But the high school that I come from, North Chicago, majority of my teachers are often like my high school's alumni, and they said like their dream was to always like go get an education, teach, and then come back here, and it's always guaranteed that they'll be hired just because they know the environment that it is maybe they're from. I never really made the connection that that's probably why they're on it.
Also, like, I think that there's, it poses the question of like how limited is our, like previous knowledge, specifically like for within elementary school or K through 12, because I think a lot of it is based on maybe schools that had funding, and I'm wondering like how reflective that is on if you want to generalize it to everyone, like I'm wondering how reflective that is, because I think it there may be some of those same issues of representation being reflected.
And I wonder, like, how you said that New York City does have a lot of people who are in tech jobs and CS, and I wonder how do you pull them from saying, instead of doing the super lucrative job of like working at Google, how about you teach? Like, how do we incentivize that for people?
I was just thinking about that in my contemporary issues class and everything. We had a whole discussion where people posed pretty interesting ideas, like the noise program. If you incentivize it through subsidized teaching programs, then even though you might not be getting $80,000 or more, who knows how much more, when you come out of college, you will have less debt to pay off, fewer loans to pay off. If they gave subsidy for teachers that were learning computer science or learning these things. But I don't know if the NSF does that much.
We can be creative too, because there are partners can work in one industry and teach, you know, a lot of, in fact, a lot of the teachers that are specialist teachers, they teach dance, the arts in general, computer science, I think is another area where we do see those part-time teachers coming in, sometimes just because the courses are either not offered to the whole school or they're small schools and they don't have enough students to have somebody on staff full-time. So, you know, that's a possibility as well. I want to go back to the equity issue though around funding, and something that just keeps popping up for me is sort of where I ended with the Q&A. This idea of computer science for all, like what is it really going to look like if schools just have to check the box and they can get away with it being the AP class, which clearly isn't for all. So I'm just going to put that out there. What do you think about that notion, and where does equity come into play, and what kind of decisions are going to have to be made?
What interested me about that was that in response to your question, she kind of mentioned that, like, they're hoping that the for all aspect will come and happen, like elementary school and middle school, which I didn't totally get, like, the impression that that's what the focus was with, like, trying to include computer science classes. Like, from the articles, I kind of got the impression that it was trying to focus in high schools, that you kind of mentioned trying to get into middle schools. And so I'm just curious on how, like, what extent are they trying to teach computer science? Because there's only so much you can do with, like, elementary school children and middle school kids and high school kids. And there obviously will be inequity if someone takes it all through elementary, middle school, and then gets to the AP level, and someone just takes the elementary school kind of level and continue past that, because it's the kind of thing that's like a foreign language where you need to keep building on it, need to keep learning. So I think it would be hard to enforce equity if the classes get so much dramatically harder in high school, and they're not really available to everyone, you know, if they're technically like present in the school.
Also, I feel like there's like a specific like attitude to take it. Like a lot of people are like, I could take an AP class, but I didn't want to take the AP class. Like I don't want to take the AP test. I didn't want to have that like kind of like stigma to it. Like I know plenty of people who are like, oh, that's a really cool class, like AP art history, but I don't want to take the AP test. And so like trying to reach that for all, and how do you do the for all if you're going to check the box for the AP test?
What I found like kind of the most aggravating about that was like, if I was in high school, like when I was in high school, I would not have been comfortable taking an AP computer science class because I had no background, like I had no experience with that. And like, I don't think it's CS for all if a high school has an AP class, but not even like an intro class, because an AP is like designed for people who are advanced, and like that's clearly not giving every single student in that school an opportunity to be educated. That was what I think that goes directly against their like mission.
With what she had said earlier, she was the timing. I know that in my high school I had an option to either take an engineering class or advanced, and I couldn't take both because there's only so many hours in a day. You can only go to school for 7 hours, and there's all those time restrictions. But I wanted to take so many classes that I couldn't take in high school, so you have to sacrifice one for the other. And I think that CS for all, if it's just AP, is gonna get sacrificed because there's so many other different electives people need to take. For requirements, I mean, there's are requirements to graduate. No one's going to take CS to graduate.
It might also be like an issue of it being really like classified as an elective, because I think that pretty much any type of job you would get after graduating high school or college would involve some kind of like technical knowledge, whether it be like making PowerPoints or whatever. And I think maybe if it was framed more in a way of this is required or not optional, that would help be like for all issue, because at the very least everyone would receive like the fundamentals of it.
I think the challenge is also the technology in the schools. So a lot of schools still only have one computer lab. How do you cycle all the children in the school, you know, through that lab? And then we also have this other you know, it's kind of like a perfect storm, you could say, because CS for All is gonna collide with Park. Now, New York State is a park state still, I think, although they've slowed down.
I think it's a different vendor, but same idea.
But basically what they want to be able to do with the testing of students is they want it to be computer-based and adaptive. So there are two consortia that have been working for the past 3 years on these computer-based adaptive testing models. And so a couple of states were kind of, you know, New York State was one of the early part states, and we were like totally for it. I think it's kind of, you know, like I said, we're in kind of retrench mode, but if New York State adopts some type of, let's say, computer-based testing, what that means now is that all the kids have to get tested. So if all the kids in the school have to get tested and you've got one computer lab, you basically, by the time you run one set of kids through, you know, everybody, and the way Park works is you're supposed to administer it. They wanted to do it 3 times a year. That was not sustainable. I think they're changing it to 2 times a year, but still, if you have to run everybody through in September to October, maybe it takes you till November to get everybody to run through. It's computer adaptive, so it doesn't matter when the kid takes it. Then you have to start the cycle again for the spring. You have these large chunks of time where that computer lab is primarily being used for testing. So how do you use it for instructional purposes? And this is what they're finding in all the places that have piloted it, is that it basically takes your computer lab offline for a couple of months.
And they're also findings in New York State, one of the reasons that New York State hasn't rolled out Park is that we have whole districts that do not have sufficient internet connectivity to run the tests, to do anything.
Right.
Where you know, they can't handle more than 5 computers being online at a time. Even though they have computer lab, they're still working with software that is not in the cloud. So there are school districts within the state that are saying that there's no way, even within 5 years, unless additional funding comes from somewhere, that they can be ready. And that, I think, is another challenge towards computer science.
Is that part of like the money that's going towards CS for All? Like putting computers in like efficient technology in schools? Is that part of like, is that a like sector of the budget? Probably, right?
I would hope so, that there's some
I would-
money for that.
I would hope there's some money.
Yeah.
It is grant funded. I don't know to what extent it's going towards hardware or software or any of that. I think that it sounds like some of the onus is going to fall on each individual school to figure out how to budget schools. And I think that is going to be an issue where schools may have to decide computer science or keep my art program. It'll be interesting to see how it rolls out.
And it's hard because it's interesting, when my first year teaching, I taught a computer class. We had a brand new, school got a grant, and we had, you know, a room full of, you know, computers. And it's really hard, you know, even though they were brand new, the maintenance and, you know, kids do things with computers because they can, not because they should, you know. So it's like, you know, and just, so the maintenance and keeping everything up and running and keeping the software clean and there's a lot that goes into keeping, you know, just one computer lab up and running. And that's not to say it shouldn't be done, but it's just that all has to be built in. You know, if you're going to do computer science for all, you need the technical assistance at every school. It's not enough to have one person. In our district, we had a computer science person, and he was running around to 52 schools. And, you know, everybody was, you know, calling him, you know, for help with this and help with that and help with the other thing.
And in New York City, most schools now have laptop carts. The these stations, these charging stations, we can roll into a classroom because space is a premium too. So we've lost a lot of the actual computer labs because those have had to be turned into classrooms. So now the lab comes in on a cart and kids will open up their laptops and half the keys are missing. So that, you know, that kind of upkeep is not happening currently.
I also wonder, like, along with upkeep of like equipment, upkeep of staff, and like having like the ability for a school to hire a teacher who specifically can do CS. And so then I feel like I see a bunch of like math and science teachers being forced into like this like rushed CS training, and then like you guys said, like with your experience with CS in high school, a teacher doesn't really know that much CS and it's kind of just like, well, here's the textbook. So I wonder like how long it takes for that turnover. Like, oh well, now everyone knows both, and it's better than that.
So I'm just curious, I did not go to college here. I went to college years and years and years ago. Is there a computer science requirement at all? It doesn't.
It's part of the new curriculum. The new curriculum has
Yeah,
a technology requirement, which is why our.
But the technology is broadly defined.
Yeah, I'm sure you can take GIS or like, glorified Excel class.
So
They're thinking that our classes that use media threads will qualify
Yeah.
for the technology.
And
Yes way.
I asked because, so I thought it was interesting how she talked about how in the history of computer science education, there was more offered in the 70s and 80s than there is now. And I remember having computer science in elementary school. I remember having it, well, in elementary school, we walked into a room about as big as this room, and the whole thing was one computer. And it printed out Snoopy and X's and O's on a printer that was this wide. But so I don't know that that really counted as computer science, but show and tell. But I had it in high school, and I had it as a requirement in college. Which I feel like dates me in a way. And actually, what I learned in college, Lego, which definitely dates me. But I just think it's interesting that we've sort of gone backwards in that it's not being looked at and required the way it was at one point when it was new. Now granted, the classes I took don't serve me in any way because technology changes so rapidly. And I think whoever said that adaptability piece is key. Is one of the things our students do need to learn, we need to learn, is how to adapt to the ever-changing technology.
I mean, I'm dealing with 3 different Windows operating systems right now. Because I upgraded to 10 at home and they would only give me 8 here. And I learned 7. So I'm like in between 3 operating systems right now. So definitely learning adaptability.
My question with requirements is like, does the requirements take away from specialization? Because then what about people that their whole college life like doing CS now? If a person just took a requirement portion of CS, would they be able to get the same job? Be able to all have the same amounts of specialized?
They're not.
But what would be the purpose of requirement? Just so that everyone has a base knowledge. Because it's important. I know that it's important. I'm a finance major, but
So I think if you think about the way the foundation's shift is happening at Barnard, this idea of thinking about modes of thinking, and so that everyone has some exposure to that mode of thinking.
Like grounded.
And your specialization in computer science will in no way be.
no, I was just curious.
Yeah, there are a lot of, I'm sorry. Okay. There are like a lot of different like interesting classes. I know a couple of people that are in this classical computing context, which is at Columbia, which is like very different from like the pure like let's do a lot of Java kind of classes. And I think that adding as a requirement is really interesting and like a good choice, just because it is it is a lot like math, but it's like still a slightly different way of thinking. There's a lot of math doesn't have as much as like design as computer science does, and kind of like pre-thinking before you go into the problem. So I think that's really a valuable addition, even if it's just one class, because it kind of does challenge your brain in a really different way than that other class does.
I was just thinking
how I always wanted to take the computer science class, and I remember people being like, well, at this point, what are you gonna do? You're gonna take one class and not really be able to do anything in the field if you only take one class, and of course you could learn more after, but like in school, like why not just go on Code Academy or whatever? So I feel like it's so much more important, yeah, to get it earlier so that you know when you get to college, oh, I want to minor in this, it was interesting. But like having one requirement at Barnard for tech, I don't know. I mean, it's, yeah, it's better than nothing, yeah.
I mean, like, I certainly feel the same way. I feel like that the fact that you're offering it and, like, there will be exposure. Because some people, like, they don't know if they're going to be interested in it. And I went to a high school that did have a technology requirement. And I had to take a full year of comp sci, and I also had to take technical drafting, which almost like no one I knew enjoyed it. But I enjoyed it. And so like, I feel like just having that as an option, and so people are like have that exposure and do learn how to think in that way, because all it really is really you're taking an idea, you're learning how to kind of like bring an idea to like a physicality, that kind of thing, or like some kind of interpretation, which is like what I'm doing with architecture, but also like I see the parallel in computer science. So I think that that's really valuable, even if it won't get you far in the field. You know?
I can say, having had that requirement when I was in college, well, I don't know, I think I'm more comfortable with computers now. And I've had to learn a lot more on my own and teach myself, and I'm not coding, I'm not a computer science major by any stretch of the imagination. Did I go in that direction? But I think that I was ahead of a lot of my peers when I entered the workforce in terms of just being comfortable sitting down. And
I dropped my computer science class. I took it as a freshman, and I don't know, I couldn't get my first string of code to work. And I was like, okay, I'm dropping this class. But yeah, I ended up, it's funny, I mean, and then I ended up teaching it. But what I was teaching was, so we had the Apple computers, and I don't know if any of you have ever heard of HyperCard. But basically HyperCard was a program where you would build stacks. And stacks could hold different kinds of information. And what my kids loved to do with it was create a stack that you could then play, and it would run an animation. So there would be, you know, a plane flying across, and people running, and animals, and you could take things and move them across the screen. And so we would create HyperCard stacks for all different kinds of things and play with all they had buttons, and the buttons would do things, they'd make noises and stuff like that. Yeah, so, but what I can say though is, as an undergraduate, my mentor said, Maria, you have to be computer literate before you leave school, because it's the way of the future. And she made me type my senior thesis on a real computer, and that was back when a computer was a black screen with green letters, and you had the F9s, everything were functions. Very different from what we have these days. But because I was computer literate when I left college, that allowed me, I was the only person that knew anything about computers in the school, and I was willing to go to a workshop and learn a little bit more about it, and then I was willing to learn alongside my students, and you know, being computer literate definitely made a difference in my career as a teacher, because I was always one step ahead.
How to use the smartboard. Like, that was the biggest problem in my high school. None of the teachers knew use the smartboard. And then, like, we had one of our teachers who, he, like, had minored in computer science, and he was like, they don't even know how to, like, make a YouTube video appear on PowerPoint. And he was like, I have to be the one to do everyone's YouTube videos. So, like, doing stuff like that, simple, like, computer literacy helps with your teaching strategies.
is there anyone you haven't heard from?
Now this is sort of touching
get to regulate one kid at home.
So I think that's a challenge.
I think it is a challenge, although I have to say, New York City Department of Ed has a pretty good firewall. And so a year ago, I tried to teach a course over in a public school, and I left banging my head against the wall every single class session because I couldn't access the technology I normally teach with because it couldn't get through their firewall. So there's some measure of protection.
You couldn't show YouTube videos.
I couldn't show YouTube videos.
I think that's the same.
I couldn't use media thread.
Middle school too. And sorry, and also something else I was thinking about was, I'm guessing that, she wants to place more emphasis on elementary and middle school. And so what happens when a family moves from Texas or somewhere and comes to New York for high school or something, and all the peers already had years, maybe, of computer training, and you don't really have any. And all of a sudden you're in high school, people are taking other classes. Does that mean in high school you also have to have beginner classes? The same as in elementary and middle school, since you have to start at the same base level? That's my question.
I think that touches upon your point, like, there are AP classes offered in CS, and what about people are deterred from taking AP classes because they feel like they don't have background in CS.
And then also just, if you do end up getting the most basic class in high school, like that's not something that you really want to share with all your peers, for example, it might turn into something negative if that doesn't happen. But of course, there are ways to make it more possible.
I think what I really was most excited by was the fact that it's not just computer science, that it's actually the whole, it's this computer science engineering piece. So they have kids working on projects, and there's physical work that happens with that, and project work that happens with that, and that it's about applying that computer science to real world problems. I think that's what I'm most excited by.
I think we've been focusing a lot on technology in the classroom, but then there's 2-year-olds that already know how to work a smartphone, and how does that affect the way that children are learning now in the modern age of technology, and how the teachers might be in an institutional lag in a sense because they learned about technology or computer science in a different era.
Yeah, for me, like, one thing I was thinking about that was, like, we were talking about, I guess, like, where's all the funding gonna come from, to get these computer labs or laptops, but I think it's also important to note that, there are other, like, platforms available, whether it's, like, tablets, or many kids, as they get younger, like, they have, like, more and more, younger kids have smartphones, and so along with these smartphones, there are other apps or different programs that they can use, like, learn, like, about, like, programming, or whether it's, like, fundamentals of, like, problem solving, or learning how to do a for loop. So, like, I don't know, like, I guess, like, how, what would be the possibility of, like, New York, like, adopting a platform like that is more accessible to probably all students, when one of the biggest things that it faces is, like, probably the budget for this program.
That, again, raises some equity issues though, because you think about it, not every child has a smartphone.
Yeah.
A lot of children have smartphones. A lot more children have phones that aren't smartphones, some by choice and some by economics. New York City did lift its ban on phones, so phones are allowed in schools, and I know that teachers are starting to use them more and more as a way to have kids answer questions in class and participate in different ways, but it is an issue. My son this summer, who's in 7th grade, he had a homework assignment that involved taking selfies. And I raised the issue with the teachers that you're making an assumption that they have a device to take these selfies with. My son happened to misplace his phone, and I wasn't letting him use mine, but it was an issue. And that's just one example, but like, I would imagine there were probably 4 or 5 kids in the class who didn't have access. And the response I got from the teacher was, well, you could go to the library, and there's one on a computer in the library. And I was like, absolutely. Absolutely not. I don't think that works in a public library, that you can take a selfie. But, you know, I think these are things that we need to think about as we are thinking about what kind of technology we are bringing into the classroom. Yes, tablets are cheaper than laptops, and maybe tablets are a good way to go, but I think that the school does have to provide the technology. We can't assume that every family is going to be able to provide it themselves.
Yeah, bring your own device doesn't always work.
And I also think you'll see like a bigger, like even bigger gap between schools that are at different sizes, because like maybe one school can't afford to do tablets that like, you can only really play this like, not once, there are a billion, but like this one coding game. While like another school has like kids taking apart computers and like getting to right into the nitty gritty. So like, that's the other thing.
I think just like a lot of what we discussed speaks to like the larger issue of implementing change in like education systems, because a lot of it has to do with there's funds and like there's a financial aspect, but then there's also that cultural aspect of like curriculums being based on what a society considers important. So because there are so many more jobs that are computer science is required to do, that's being reflected in schools, and I'm wondering how this will play out with like future changes that need to be implemented.
We've raised a lot of questions tonight. I think there's a lot to be thought about. I don't know that we have any concrete answers at this point in time, but you all will be those people who are starting to develop these answers, so keep thinking about it. Go home, write your discussion posts, your initial posts, make sure you respond to other people over the weekend, and please take the survey, which takes 2 minutes, tonight. And I'll see you in 2 weeks. Next week?